What happens when a man loses everything, his job, his home, his hope, and finds himself standing before a judge with nothing left but his love for his children? In Providence, Rhode Island, inside the familiar wood-paneled courtroom of municipal court, such moments of human drama unfolded daily. But on this particular morning, something extraordinary was about to happen that would remind everyone watching why Judge Frank Caprio earned the title America's Kindest Judge. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as people shuffled into the gallery, each carrying their own burden of unpaid tickets, parking violations, and minor infractions. At the defendant's table sat Michael Torres, a 34-year-old construction worker whose calloused hands trembled slightly as he clutched a manila folder containing documents that told the story of his recent struggles. His worn work boots had seen better days, and his shirt, though clean and pressed, showed the careful maintenance of someone who couldn't afford to replace it. Judge Caprio entered the courtroom with his characteristic gentle authority, his silver hair catching the morning light. Those familiar with his show, Caught in Providence, knew his reputation for fairness, but even longtime viewers couldn't have predicted what would unfold in the next few minutes. As he settled into his chair behind the bench, his kind eyes surveyed the courtroom with genuine interest in each person who would appear before him that day. Michael's case seemed straightforward on paper. Multiple parking violations totaling $850 in fines. In most courtrooms, this would be a simple matter of payment or payment plans. The violations had accumulated over several months in downtown Providence, where Michael had been searching desperately for work after a construction accident left him temporarily unable to perform his usual duties. Each ticket represented another day of hope that someone would hire him, another attempt to rebuild his life for his two young daughters. The bailiff called his name, and Michael stood slowly, his folder gripping tighter. As he approached the bench, Judge Caprio noticed something that court records couldn't capture, the quiet dignity of a man who had been knocked down by life but refused to give up. The judge's expression softened as he reviewed the case, not just reading the violations, but observing the person standing before him. "Good morning, Mr. Torres," Judge Caprio said warmly, his voice carrying the familiar Rhode Island accent that had become beloved by millions of viewers worldwide. "I see you have several parking violations here. Can you tell me what happened?" Michael's voice was steady but quiet as he began to explain his situation. He spoke of the construction accident that had injured his back, the months of physical therapy, the rejection letters from potential employers, and the mounting bills that seemed impossible to manage on unemployment benefits. Most judges would have interrupted by now, ready to move on to sentencing or payment arrangements. But Judge Caprio listened. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped, giving Michael his complete attention. The courtroom felt unusually quiet. Even the court reporters seemed to pause their typing. There was something in the judge's posture that signaled this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. "And your family?" Judge Caprio asked gently. "Tell me about your children." Michael's eyes brightened for the first time that morning as he spoke about his daughters, ages 8 and 10, who lived with him in a small apartment. He described how he made their lunches each morning, helped with homework each evening, and tucked them in each night, promising them that things would get better. His voice cracked slightly as he admitted that he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep that promise. No one in the courtroom expected what Judge Caprio would say next. Michael Torres hadn't always been the man standing nervously before Judge Caprio that morning. Just 18 months earlier, he had been a respected foreman on construction sites throughout Rhode Island, known for his reliability and skilled craftsmanship. His colleagues respected him, his supervisors trusted him with complex projects, and his daughters saw him leave each morning in his hard hat and safety vest, proud to tell their friends that their daddy built the buildings they passed on their way to school. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in March when scaffolding collapsed at a downtown renovation project. Michael had been checking structural supports on the 3rd floor when poorly secured equipment gave way, sending him tumbling 15 feet onto concrete below. The physical injuries, 3 cracked ribs, a herniated disc, and a concussion, healed over months of painful recovery. But the invisible wounds cut deeper. The fear that gripped him whenever he looked up at tall buildings, the constant worry about his ability to provide for his daughters, and the growing stack of medical bills that consumed his savings. Workers' compensation covered the immediate medical expenses, but the reduced benefits barely stretched to cover rent, groceries, and basic necessities. Michael had always been proud of his independence, working since he was 16 and never asking anyone for help. Now at 34, he found himself clipping coupons, shopping at thrift stores, and lying awake at night, calculating whether he could afford his daughter's school supplies. The parking violations began during his desperate job search. Each morning, Michael would dress in his best clothes and drive downtown, parking wherever he could find space as he walked from business to business, construction site to construction site, hoping someone would give him a chance. His back still ached, limiting him to lighter duties, but he was willing to do anything honest to support his girls. Day after day, he returned to his car to find another bright orange ticket tucked under his windshield wiper. In most courtrooms across America, Michael's story would have been irrelevant. Judges face overwhelming caseloads, and the system demands efficiency over empathy. A parking violation is a parking violation, regardless of circumstances. Pay the fine, set up a payment plan, or face the consequences. That's how justice typically works for ordinary people navigating extraordinary struggles. But Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom operated differently. As Michael spoke, the judge's attention never wavered. When Michael mentioned his daughters, Judge Caprio asked their names, Emma and Sophia. When Michael described his injury, the judge asked about his recovery and current limitations. Most remarkably, when Michael's voice faltered while explaining how he had to tell his daughters they couldn't afford their usual Christmas presents last year, Judge Caprio didn't rush him or suggest he move on to the legal matters at hand. Most judges would simply read the fine and move on, whispered one of the court observers to her companion. But Judge Caprio leaned forward, looked into the man's eyes, and asked a question no one expected. "Mr. Torres," the judge said quietly, "when you were looking for work downtown, were you hopeful? Did you believe you would find something?" The question caught Michael off guard. In all his interactions with the legal system, insurance companies, workers' compensation hearings, previous court appearances for minor matters, no one had ever asked about his feelings or his hope. They asked for documentation, signatures, and payments. They treated him as a case number, a claim, a defendant. But Judge Caprio was asking about his heart. "Yes, Your Honor," Michael replied, his voice stronger now. "I believed that if I kept trying, kept showing up, someone would give me a chance. I had to believe that. My daughters were counting on me." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. He saw not just a man who had violated parking regulations, but a father who had refused to give up, a worker who maintained his dignity despite circumstances beyond his control, and a human being who deserved more than bureaucratic indifference. The courtroom remained unusually quiet, sensing that something significant was unfolding before them. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Caprio reviewed the stack of parking violations one more time. $850, a sum that might seem manageable to some, but for Michael Torres it represented nearly 2 months of his reduced unemployment benefits. The gallery watched intently as the judge's fingers drummed thoughtfully on his desk, his expression unreadable. Michael stood perfectly still, his shoulders squared despite the weight of his circumstances. He had prepared himself for the worst-case scenario, a payment plan that would stretch his already thin budget even thinner. Or worse, consequences that could affect his ability to drive to job interviews or take his daughters to school. He had been in enough courtrooms lately to know that the system rarely bent in favor of people like him. "Mr. Torres," Judge Caprio began, his voice carrying a gravity that made everyone lean forward slightly. "These violations total $850. That's a significant amount of money." He paused, and Michael nodded solemnly, bracing himself for what came next. "But before we discuss payment," the judge continued, "I want to ask you something else. You mentioned you've been looking for work. Have you found anything?" "Yes, Your Honor," Michael replied, his voice gaining strength. "Last week, a small contracting company offered me a position. It's not what I used to make, and I'll be starting in an office doing estimates and project coordination instead of field work, but it's honest work. I start Monday." A subtle smile crossed Judge Caprio's face. "That's wonderful news. And your daughters, Emma and Sophia, they must be excited." "They are, Your Honor." "Emma asked if we can go out for pizza to celebrate, and I told her." Michael's voice caught slightly. "I told her we'd see." Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying Michael with the keen insight that had made him beloved by millions of viewers. He saw the pride in the man's posture when he spoke about finding work, the love in his voice when he mentioned his daughters, and the quiet strength that had carried him through months of struggle. "Mr. Torres," the judge said, his voice growing warmer, "I've been on this bench for many years, and I've seen thousands of people come through this courtroom. Most are here because they made poor choices or acted carelessly, but occasionally I meet someone who finds themselves here simply because life knocked them down." He paused, letting his words sink in. "These parking violations, they weren't because you were being irresponsible or disrespectful of the law. They accumulated because you were doing exactly what a good father should do, never giving up on providing for his children. You parked downtown because you had hope. You kept coming back because you had determination. Those are not qualities I want to punish." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the bailiffs stopped their usual shuffling of papers. Michael blinked in confusion, unsure where this was leading, but sensing something unprecedented was about to happen. "Instead of requiring you to pay these fines," Judge Caprio continued, his voice clear and firm, "I'm going to dismiss all charges, all of them." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Michael staggered slightly, gripping the defendant's table for support. "Your Honor, I don't understand." Judge Caprio smiled genuinely now, his eyes twinkling with the warmth that had made him famous. "Mr. Torres, you've already paid enough. You've paid with months of uncertainty, with sleepless nights, with the worry that comes with not knowing how you'll provide for your children. That's payment enough for parking violations." "But more than that," the judge continued, standing now to address not just Michael, but everyone in the courtroom. "I want you to take that $850 you would have paid in fines, and I want you to take Emma and Sophia out for pizza. Take them to a movie. Buy them something special. You've earned it, and they deserve to celebrate their father, a man who never stopped fighting for them." Michael's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to find words. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, something rarely heard in municipal court. Even the court officers were wiping their eyes. Judge Caprio had just demonstrated why justice isn't only about laws and regulations, it's about recognizing the humanity in every person who stands before the bench. As Michael Torres walked out of that Providence courtroom, his step was lighter than it had been in months. The manila folder that had contained the weight of his legal troubles now held dismissal papers, tangible proof that sometimes the system works exactly as it should. But more than legal relief, he carried something infinitely more valuable: the restoration of his faith in human kindness and the knowledge that his struggle had been seen, understood, and honored by someone with the power to make a difference. This single moment in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom represents something profound about the nature of justice itself. In law schools across America, students learn about precedent, procedure, and punishment. They study statutes and sentencing guidelines, learning to apply rules consistently and impartially. But Judge Caprio understood something that can't be taught from textbooks. True justice requires wisdom to know when compassion serves the law better than punishment. For over 3 decades on the bench, Judge Caprio transformed countless lives through moments just like this one. He saw beyond the violations and infractions to recognize the human stories behind them. An elderly woman who couldn't afford her parking ticket became an opportunity to discuss the challenges of living on a fixed income. A young man with traffic violations became a chance to offer guidance about making better choices. A struggling family facing overwhelming fines became a reminder that sometimes mercy accomplishes more than punishment ever could. Michael's case illustrates why millions of viewers around the world fell in love with Caught in Providence. They weren't just watching a television show about municipal court proceedings, they were witnessing a masterclass in human decency. Judge Caprio's approach resonated so deeply because it represented how most people wished the world worked. With understanding instead of indifference, with compassion instead of cold bureaucracy, and with recognition that everyone deserves dignity regardless of their circumstances. The ripple effects of that morning's decision extended far beyond the courtroom walls. Michael returned to his daughters with news that would change their understanding of fairness and authority. Emma and Sophia learned that judges could be kind, that the system could work in their favor, and that their father's struggles had been validated by someone who mattered. That evening, the Torres family did go out for pizza, their first restaurant meal in months, and Michael watched his daughters smile with a joy that made every struggle worthwhile. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Michael himself. Judge Caprio's decision didn't just dismiss parking violations. It restored a man's sense of worth at a moment when he needed it most. As Michael started his new job the following Monday, he carried with him the confidence that comes from being treated with respect and dignity. His supervisor later noted his exceptional dedication and positive attitude, qualities that might have been permanently damaged by a different judicial experience. Judge Frank Caprio's legacy lives on in thousands of such moments, each representing his fundamental belief that the law exists to serve humanity, not the other way around. He understood that justice isn't a one-size-fits-all proposition, but rather a careful balance of accountability, mercy, and hope. His courtroom became a place where people's stories mattered, where circumstances were considered, and where second chances were not just possible, but celebrated. This was just one case among thousands, but it perfectly captures why the world called him America's kindest judge. Judge Caprio reminded us that justice isn't only about laws, it's about humanity. And that is the legacy he leaves behind, a demonstration that even within the rigid structures of the legal system, there is always room for understanding, always space for compassion, and always hope for redemption. Thank you for reading this tribute to Judge Frank Caprio. If his story touched you, please share it with others so his message of kindness and fairness can continue to inspire the world.